Yes, live is ready. Bonapriya ma'am, you can
Yes,
start.
ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
can start.
Thank you. The path to success is to take massive and determined action, as we are taking the right step to be here. Good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to be a moderator for this conference, and I wish you all a pleasant day. I would like to extend a warm welcome all for the third day of International Conference on Language, Literature, and Culture, organized by PG and Research Department of English, Trinity College for Women, Arts and Science, Namakkal, Tamil Nadu. Excellence is not being the best, it is doing your best. I would like to call Ms. S. Poornima, UGHOD, Department of English, Trinity College for Women, to deliver her welcome address. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Bonapriya ma'am. My humble greetings to everyone. Thanks for the opportunity given. A hearty welcome to one and all gathering here. First and foremost, I warmly welcome our dignitaries of Trinity College. Welcome you, sirs and wisdoms. I wholeheartedly welcome Professor Dr. Arnold Gross, sir, from Germany, and sir, I am so delighted
Yes.
to the professors, scholars, and students who are all staying here. Welcome you all, as welcome as the flowers in May. Once again, I welcome each and everyone for this excellent session. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcoming is the part of our tradition. I would really like to invite Ms. Poornima, UGHOD, Department of English, to inaugurate the well-being, our honorable chief guest. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Banapriya. Once again, greetings to all. It's my honor to introduce our eminent chief guest, Professor Dr. Arnold Grosser from Germany. As per Shakespeare's words, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and somehow greatness rests upon them. And as per Theodore Roosevelt's words, the great man is always the man of mighty effort. Certainly, our today's chief guest is the best instance for this. Arnold Grosser is working as an associate professor, Faculty of Humanities, Technical University of Berlin, Germany. Sar has done 40 publications and 12 projects. His most famous books are Theories of Culture, Globalization and Intelligence Identity, and so on. He is an exponent of culture and psychology. Sar is a member of American Psychology Association, World Council for Psychotherapy, Indian Society of Hunter-Gatherer Research, United Nations Economical and Social Council, United Nations Human Rights Council, and so on. Sar is a reviewer of European Journal of Psychological Assessment, Sustainability, Culture and Psychology, Journal of Social Sciences, Journal of Rural Studies, etc. Really, I'm finding some difficulty of searching words to express his greatness. Within a minute is not enough to describe him. No doubt, we all know that he is an admiring personality. He is a great man, a man of honor, a man of inspiration, a man of culture, and a man of excellence. It's my greatest privilege to wholeheartedly invite Professor Dr. Arnold Grosser to engage the session here. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your kind acceptance and valuable presence. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. A guest in the house is always a sign for good fortune in the near future. I bet you can easily see the happiness in your eyes. Welcome, Professor Dr. Arnold Groh, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities, Technical University of Berlin, Germany, to deliver his valuable address on the topic, the rescue of indigenous culture. We welcome you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind invitation. It's an honor for me to be with you. I was actually surprised, and I wonder how you found me. How did you come about with the idea to invite me to your conference? But well, still, I feel very privileged to be with you, and if you allow me, I will just start with the lecture.
Yes, sir. Yes, Of course, sir.
Okay, so thank you very much again. So I will share my screen with you. So 1 second. Do you see the full screen now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so here we start. Yes, I have been invited to this conference, and I'm going to give you a talk about the rescue of indigenous culture. First of all, please allow me to briefly introduce myself. I am the head of the research institution Structural Analysis of Cultural Systems. And
needing authorization or kind of
I beg your pardon?
Nothing, sir. Some technical issues. You can proceed, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So we are in special consultative status with the United Nations Economical and Social Council. And these are the departments, the UN departments that we are predominantly involved with. So let us start with talking about indigenous life. Indigenous peoples, well, they have their daily life. They take care of their nutrition and of their housing, almost like everyone else in the world. We still have about 7,000 cultures in this world. About 4,000 to 5,000 are considered indigenous, but 2,000 of them are severely endangered. So let us ask, why should indigenous culture be accepted, respected, protected, maintained, and even rescued? Well, there are more reasons to that than just the law, than human rights, and then ethics. Well, we are all part of creation, and indigenous peoples, other than the industrial global culture, they live as part of nature. They live in, with, and from the natural environment without destroying it. Our culture has forgotten how to do that. In order to understand how cultures function and what are the mechanisms within and between cultures, it is important to understand the relevance of the body within cultural identity. So cultures consist of persons, of human beings, and culture itself is an effect of the mutual connections and communications and interactions between humans. And each human has a cultural identity. And the various cultural elements that we have, like language, like the way of housing, etc., they all have different relevance to cultural identity. And what is most relevant is the bodily appearance. This is how we define ourselves before others. And in psychology, we have a research area that's called embodiment or social embodiment. And this pertains to the connectivity between cognitions and the body, which is embedded in a social system. So the way we physically appear determines our cognitions and vice versa. And our cognitions they determine how we live in our social system and vice versa. And the social system determines how we appear bodily, physically, and vice versa. All that happens through symbolization. We use signs, and this is why semiotics are so important to understand the cultural mechanisms. However, in our modern world, people have been raised apart and separated from nature. So a phenomenon that we find now, especially in the realm of psychotherapy, is the prevalence of gymnophobia, which means the problem with the human natural body as such. People have problems to even accept the uncovered human body as it is in its natural state. And so this leads to lots of irrationalities, even among academics and fellow scientists. Well, persons always present themselves before others. They do that in different ways, in different cultures. And we are talking about self-presentation, self-definition, and impression management. So we now go a bit further and deeper into the cultural mechanisms. When we look at today's world, there is a very strong dominance of the industrial culture, of the globalized culture, above other cultures, especially indigenous cultures. The dominant culture exerts very strong social pressure on the dominated industrial cultures, and this is the basic mechanism behind it. Representatives of the dominant culture, when they appear in indigenous contexts, they are role models. If they wish so or not, they are role models. They are perceived as role models. And the transfer that is taking place is basically a transfer of cultural elements, which then leads to the modification of identities. And as you can imagine from what we said before, it is the modification of the appearance of indigenous peoples who then lose their identities. They don't appear in their natural ways anymore, and then they identify themselves as part of the dominant culture. So that leads to the disintegration of the social system. And we can find that worldwide. Some theorists, they have distinguished between culture and civilization. And for example, Oswald Spengler said, culture and civilization, the living body of a soul, which is culture, and the mummy of it, which is civilization. It just functions, but it does not really live in a natural way anymore. We have done some research on we've done much research, but for example, also on life quality and on time management. We've done so in various regions of the world, and I think you can find this this study also on our website. So what we found, and this is consistent with the research of other colleagues, indigenous peoples, they only need between 40 minutes and 2 hours in average for their living, for their daily living. They go hunting, they go gathering, And that's it. For the rest of the time, they are happy, they have leisure time, they are laughing much more than people from the globalized industrial culture. They take care of each other. Even mothers, they can go away for hours. They can go down to the river, have a swim, chat with other women, and all other people in the village, they take care of the children. They feel responsible. So there's much more coherence also in their social systems. And once the processes set in that are called development, then this happy life is over. Yes, of course, we have medication and we have some amenities in the globalized world, but at the bottom line, people in indigenous cultures, they are happy and they do not destroy the planet as we are presently doing. So what are the effects of cultural change? All of us know that the CO2 level in the atmosphere is rising. It's increasingly rising. So I was born in 1960. So look what has happened since then. It goes up and down due to winter and summer in the Northern Hemisphere, where most of industry is situated. But even the COVID crisis has not changed much of it. And even when we change now to electromobility, as some politicians want us to do, even if we fly less, then, well, IT now has, the information technology has a much larger CO2 footprint now than the worldwide flights. So here's another effect, or here are many other effects of cultural change. Some people say it's the Anthropocene, which is the era of the anthropos in Greek actually means the human being. It's not quite correct because it is not the human being destroying this planet. It is a particular culture, which is the industrial and now globalized culture that is destroying the planet. The indigenous peoples, they do not do that. So what are we doing? What is our culture that has spread worldwide over all continents now? Our culture, see what we are doing. We are killing the life in the oceans. There's desertification. We are deforesting the world. Well, we are polluting waters, etc., etc. Look at all these points. So one colleague said, it may be too late. We are becoming Mars. So do we really want to go on like this? This is a very recent press release. Only a few weeks ago, the United Nations Conference to Combat Desertification said we are facing a triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Some psychotherapists speak of the hidden script. So there's something behind our behavior that we all agree with, and which is not clearly stated. And this is, for example, the prevailing unquestioned consent that there has to be progress and there has to be expansion of our culture. And the hidden script also implies that we are not accepting the given natural condition, but rather dominating. We are rather dominating, manipulating, and even destroying this natural condition. And again, we find some interesting connections to the body. So the way that we deal with nature and the way that we deal with the body, they reflect each other. So in nature, we destroy the forests, we do some irrational agriculture, although rainforests, they provide so much food in terms of fruit and nuts, etc., a whole variety of nutrition. Still, the forests are being cut down to do agriculture as we want to do it. And desertification is going on. So once the forests are gone, sometimes you can do only a couple of years of agriculture in that place, and then the soil is washed away, and then the rain stays away, and the regions become desert, and you can hardly plant forests there anymore. So we do similar things with our bodies. And actually, when we look back to ancient times, there are some very interesting relations between field use and the way people treated their bodies. For example, if you think of some biblical commandments of not to shave the beard and to leave some more hair at the side, that had its parallel actually in the field use, because they left some of the harvest. They did not cut all of the harvest so that the poor people could come and also collect it. Then look at how we design landscapes. Well, there are similarities to what modern people in the modern world do with tattoos and with piercing of their bodies. And then look at the semiotic function of covering the body. When we analyze that from communication science, then this is also a denial of the given natural condition. We hide our natural bodies. And again, well, there's some sound going. Somebody has not switched off the microphone. Again, the hidden script. It also contains the creating of new enemy concepts, a redefinition of the evil, some iconoclasm. So paintings that seem to be too natural are being taken away, especially paintings that depict human bodies. They are taken away from museums. And so again, the body in the modern world, there is an increasing taboo, and the standards of how people are allowed to show themselves, they become more and more rigid. And when we try to analyze that from the perspective of social embodiment, we again have to take into consideration the cognitions that are taking place, which result from these taboos and standards, and the cultural dominance that the industrial global culture exerts on indigenous peoples, and then the effect, how do we delete indigenous cultures? What is the exact mechanism of that? And we shall take a closer look to this, have a closer look to this mechanism. Well, some more theory here. There's a spectrum of cultures. The idea of considering a spectrum goes back to Levi Strauss, and he suggested that we could talk about cold versus hot cultures. So the cold cultures, they are situated here at the indigenous end, so to speak. And once progress has taken its path, the industrial global culture, the spearhead, so to say, this it is situated at the other far end. This is where our modern culture is. And I think all who are participating in the session now are globalized. We all use the internet right now. We are acquainted with electricity, etc. So here's some contrast between the two ends. There's again some sound going on. Okay, well, so the contrast between cold and hot means, for example, that indigenous peoples, they live more in sustainable ways, whereas we live in consuming ways. They have strict traditions, we have more elaboration. They have rigid norms, we have more fluctuation. They are in face-to-face societies, we live in large societies. At this far end, they have no body covering, and so gradually they start with a loincloth, etc., whereas then at the other far end, we have full body covering. And whereas our culture at this end, we are the dominant ones, the indigenous peoples, they are being dominated. So what is the destructive mechanism? In brief, we can say that there are dominant influence, there's a dominant influence to the indigenous culture, which becomes very much evident in the introduction of body covering standards. So they start to clothe themselves. And by that, they lose their indigenous identity. They do not live the way they have been before. They do not present themselves, so they do not define themselves as they did before. And in the end of the day, they lose their indigenous identity. And since cultures are made up of humans, this then means the disintegration of indigenous culture. So when we are talking about the rescue, we have to find ways to counteract these destructive mechanisms. And as I'm talking now before a women's university, of course, we also have to take the gender perspective. And there's one very prominent phenomenon going on, which is the breast taboo. You don't have that in indigenous cultures, but once there are the dominant standards of covering women's breasts, what happens is the sexualization of women's breasts. Before that, the female breast is not considered sexual in any particular way. And this sexualization then leads to the loss of female dignity. And for the entire society, this has very deep effects. There's a collective deprivation of positive, stabilizing emotional concepts, because each and every one of us has been born. We all had a mother. We have been in the ideal way, we have been breastfed. So motherliness, coziness, comfort, nourishing, all that caring is tabooed. It falls under this breast taboo. So the breast taboo actually in a psychological sense has a very deep destructive impact, and it leads to the merely functional to a merely functional concept of culture. And this is what Spengler meant with the mummy. So why should we then maintain indigenous cultures? When Klaus Töpfer was the executive director of the United Nations Environmental Program, he pointed out that indigenous peoples, they hold vital knowledge on the animals and plants with which they live. And in their cultures, there is deep knowledge of how to manage habitats and the land in environmentally friendly, sustainable ways. And this is exactly what we need now. We are destroying the planet, so we need some alternatives to that. And Töpfer went on saying that if these cultures disappear, they and their intimate relationship with nature will be lost forever. We must do all we can to protect these people. If they disappear, the world will be a poorer place. So we have to counteract. And this is what we are doing at the UN in the Indigenous Peoples Department. So I was involved with the preparation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which then became part of international law in 2007. This is the beginning of the document. Let us now look at some of the articles. Indigenous culture has to be protected. And if you look at the wording of Article 8.2a, you see that it is worded in a way that any action which has the aim or effect of depriving them, etc. So we cannot find excuses anymore and say, well, we didn't mean it, or something like this. So anything which could possibly have the effect of destabilizing indigenous culture is now an infringement of international law. And another very important article is this one, Article 11, which grants the revitalization of cultural traditions and customs. Now we cannot say anymore, oh, it's too late and we have to modernize them and we have to help them to integrate into the global society. We have to give them progress, we have to develop them, etc. No, this article clearly says that even if they have been destabilized already, if they have been partially modernized, they have the right to return. They have the right to revitalize to their own cultural traditions and customs. And they also have the right to their own educational systems. This is what states sometimes do not like, although the majority of states has signed the declaration. So they should have a proper look at what they have signed. Indigenous peoples do have the right to their own educational systems. And they do that in different ways. For example, here in the Pacific region, there's an example where this older gentleman, he explains to the youth how to navigate. They're sitting at the beach and he explains everything about the waves and the current and the wind and passes on his knowledge to the next generation. But there are also other indigenous peoples who say, okay, we do accept that the government gives us a building and gives us a school. We want to learn mathematics and English and so on. But we still want to maintain our own identity. And this, for example, she's the English teacher. So they still maintain their identity. And even at church, people say, yes, we do want to be Christians. We do accept the Bible and the New Testament, but we do want to maintain our culture, even that happens. So how to do that? How could we as academics, as scientists, participate, and how could we help to rescue indigenous culture? Well, it starts, of course, with the way that we do the research. We may not do research in invasive ways anymore. It is just the international law that forbids it. We have to minimize any invasiveness when we go to indigenous peoples. We have to integrate into their culture, live with them, stay with them, adapt to their ways of living without any compromise. We have to do that honestly and fully. And we have to do rescue work in order to observe Article 11 of the UN Declaration. We have to help them to even get back to their old traditions. And we have to do that in orientation to ethics. Of course, we should not destabilize any persons or even any cultures. We have to observe the legal standards as they exist now. And of course, methodology also forbids that we destabilize what we want to investigate. So when we work with indigenous peoples, it does not make sense that we introduce our culture and thus destabilize their culture, because we want to investigate their authentic culture. Here are some examples of total immersion. This is how we do our research. For example, here we are in Uganda doing an olfactory study, or here we are in Panama with the Embera people. So they paint our bodies the way they are painting their own bodies. So then there should be a general sense of responsibility of all who are involved, which means not only scientists, but anyone who gets into contact with indigenous people should respect them, should accept them. Also in tourism. And one example would be our Tourinfo project. It has been listed by UNESCO as a project to maintain cultural diversity. And it gives information in various languages to the visitors as how to integrate into indigenous culture. Yes, and here are some more examples from tourists who integrate into the indigenous culture. This gives a much more deeper feeling of authenticity than just watching them as bystanders. And actually, the global industrial culture has a particular responsibility, because many people now in the industrial culture, especially with regard to the environmental problems and the climate change, they have the aspiration to live close to nature. So we have to rescue ourselves. Globalization needs to rescue itself. Our culture needs to find new solutions in order to cope with the environmental crisis and to fight climate change, actually to find ways back to nature. So ideally, there should be a cross-cultural mutuality. We have to rescue each other. We have to rescue the indigenous peoples because we are the dominant ones. We are responsible for their destruction, but we also need them to rescue our culture. So indigenous peoples, they can provide orientation, but we have to ask, why are they largely, why have they been ignored by the environmental and climate debate? This is irrational because they know how to live in, with, and from nature without destroying it. Well, there have been scientists and researchers that have understood that and who have integrated into indigenous culture even way back, at least to the 19th century. And there still are other researchers who continue doing so. And this is what we need. We need to accept them, because when indigenous peoples come to our cities, we accept that they integrate into our global industrial culture. So if we really mean mutuality and equal rights for all, and mutual acceptance and respect, then we have to integrate, of course, into their culture as well. So what does rescuing mean? It is, in order to use a term from psychotherapy, it is embodied transference, because the destructive way goes like that. The dominant culture A introduces their dominant cultural elements, which then delete the indigenous elements and replaces them by the dominant ones. Rescuing means that although the indigenous culture has been damaged already, we reintroduce their old traditions. We help them to revitalize their own tradition. And the thing is that it is easy for us to do so because we are the dominant ones. Even if we say we do not want to be dominant, once we appear in indigenous settings, then the indigenous peoples, they regard us as role models. So if we wish so or not, we are role models, and therefore we could use that that position of being role models in order to help and to reintroduce the old traditions. Here's another way of visualizing this. When you see the dominant culture on one side, and when you say the dominated culture on the other side, there is an overlap. This is the sphere where both cultures meet, where they see each other. It might be tourism, it might be research, it might be settlers that are in contact with indigenous peoples, whoever. Anyway, the dominant culture, they perceive the use of cultural elements by the dominated indigenous culture. And now what we can do, when we have the choice between rejecting and say, oh, they are backward, they are primitive, or to accept them and respect them and thus is appreciating them. So once we appreciate them by also using their ways of appearance, they see that and they also perceive the ways we behave, and they see, oh, they are accepting us, they are respecting us. So we are, they have a self-perception, and we reinforce their use of cultural elements. We actually encourage them to live their traditional ways. And how can we do that? Well, we adapt to these old traditional ways and help them to reintroduce them. So here are some transcultural obstacles. Of course, again, we have to come back to the body. Why is it so? If we see the indigenous culture on the one side and the globalized culture on the other side, the indigenous peoples, they have an embodied identity. We have a disembodied identity. Indigenous peoples, they identify themselves as they are, as they have been created in their natural ways. We create our own identities by the ways we present ourselves. We hide our bodies, and we have some false and artificial identity that we practice. So for thousands of years, for all the millennia of human existence, there has been no prevalence of gymnophobia. This is a very recent, very modern phenomenon. And in the indigenous peoples, there still is no prevalence of gymnophobia. Over here, we have very high prevalence of gymnophobia because people have problems to, to adapt to the indigenous ways. And from that, due to these problems, there are irrational reactions, even in the discourse, even when you try to discuss this with other academics in an objective and rational way. This is very difficult. And this, we can subsumize this actually as some disturbances which should need some therapeutic treatments, but people are often very much used to these disturbances, so they think this is normal and that this is the correct way. So when we try to have a discourse to discuss these matters with others, we often find these irrational reactions. This could be downward comparison. People say, oh, the situation cannot be improved anyway. There's a diffusion of responsibility. People say, well, others are also doing the same, so which means they do not adapt to indigenous peoples. It is being devaluated. They say, oh, that wouldn't change anything. They just deny things, and the denial becomes problematic, as we know from psychotherapy, that if the denial itself is denied, this will be a difficult blockade for actual solutions. So we cannot go on anymore with people who deny even the denial. There's anxiety defense, the idea of adapting to indigenous peoples. They think people will be laughed at, but this is not true. I mean, we are doing that kind of research since the 1980s. And so on. So there are many excuses people try to find. They say adaptation would be faked. They don't want to give up their personality. They do not want to simulate. They do not want to play a role. Well, people are always playing a role. There is no situation in life when you do not play a role. Even when you are alone, there is self-perception. So you always play a role. Even when you sleep, you have sleeping behavior, you play a role. But there are others who understand the situation and the mechanism, and since decades there is also training taking place for intercultural competency. And actually, we, from our institution, we do such training every year. We have an annual seminar that people go through in order to train them for research in indigenous contexts. And so it might happen that people from the industrial culture, first they have a cultural shock, they have a disorienting dilemma, but then they go through through the various stages of the process, and as an outcome, they gain very much for their life. The old person breaks up, they actually are on a meta level then, and they have a very new look at life. They have a new competence of self-competence, of self-confidence, and they are able to change positions and roles, and so they gain perspectives, and they become intercultural competent. So in brief, again, here's the summary. The mechanism of indigenous cultures destruction goes as such. The dominant, they introduce new standards of visual appearance, which then modify and change, and in the end delete indigenous identity, which then means the disintegration of indigenous culture. To rescue indigenous culture means that the dominant, they reintroduce the original standards of visual appearance. Thus, a reconstitution of indigenous identity takes place, which then leads to the restabilization of indigenous culture. So if you are interested in more details, these are my latest books of 2018 and of 2020. So you hopefully find them in your libraries. That was it. Thank you very much. And of course, I also have to thank the sponsors that support us, that support our research. Thank you very much for having me in this conference.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. culture and civilization, the living body of your soul. Great words, sir. I am so grateful to you for the amazing presentation of indigenous culture, especially effects of cultural change, social impediment, spectrum of cultures. Yeah, sorry, sir. Spectrum of cultures, transcultural obstacles, etc. I want to use this note to thank you for that extraordinary presentation that you have given. It was really admirable, extraordinary, profound, and effective. Thank you for your presence and sharing your valuable ideas and great thoughts, sir. Thank you so much. Kindly share your PPT, sir. It will be useful for all.
I thank you very much for
Thank you, sir.
having me with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The session was very interesting. Yes, sir. Deforestation destroys everything. It recalls by your words, sir. We must rescue nature. You have explained well, sir. By portraying those pictures, we able to imagine the cultures, how it would be. Thank you very much, sir. We got thorough information on indigenous culture. It's a very informative session, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It's a time to give feedback. I cordially welcome the participants to give their feedback, or else if you have any queries, you can ask, sir. Welcome, participants.
Well, I'm just having a look also at the words in the chat.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Much feedback. Yes, much feedback in the chat. Yeah. Well, please also feel free to carry on this discussion by email, and you're also invited to join our seminars. We do education and training. It's free of charge, but of course you have to find ways to sponsor the travel costs to come here, and well, you can find information on that on the internet, and if you're interested, just drop me a line and we can be in touch.
Sure, sir. It's a pleasure.
And if I happen to come to India again, so maybe I can pay you a visit there.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the informative session, sir. Ma'am, shall I move to vote of thanks?
Yes, no more queries. Yes. So you can proceed.
Okay, ma'am. A grateful heart is a magnet for miracles. I feel honored and privileged having an opportunity to propose a vote of thanks for this wonderful occasion. It's my pleasure to thank our management for providing encouragement and motivation. Wholeheartedly, I must thank our principal, Dr. M.R. Lakshminarayanan, for his enthusiastic assistance. The most beautiful way to start and end the day is with a grateful heart. I take this golden opportunity to show my gratitude to the respected chief guest, Professor Dr. Arnold Groh, Associate Professor, Department of Humanities, Technical University of Berlin, Germany. He inspires us with his wonderful words. Thank you, sir. A special thanks to our UG HOD, Ms. S. Poornima, to deliver her welcome address and chief guest address. Thank you, ma'am. I extend big thanks to my colleagues who shows their contribution. Last but not least, my deep sense of thanks and appreciation goes to all the participants who were live with us and attended this conference. Thank you, one and all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhanupriya. Arnold, sir, really thank you so much, sir. Shall we wind up, sir?
Well, I thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
for sharing. And well, I say goodbye for now. And yes, I think it's evening now. Have a nice evening in India.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, over here it's noon. So
okay, sir.
in the middle of the day. Okay, so it was a good time placement also. Thank you for that. Thank you for
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Have a nice noon. Thank you, sir.
all the best to you. Okay, so
Thank you.
yes.